The radio hissed with static as Clara Mitchell pressed against the blood-stained rocks, her HK-416 dry and her pickup team 3 hours late. Operative lost, mission compromised, came the report back to Joint Special Operations Command. No movement at given grid, presumed KIA, 29 years old, dark blonde hair matted with dirt and blood. She listened to her own death being confirmed, while enemy fighters cheered what they thought was the end of the American ghost who had tormented them for weeks. What they didn't realize, what her own command couldn't imagine, was that Clara Mitchell had endured worse than a mountainside trap and a 30-foot plunge into a ravine. They assumed leaving her broken would finish the mission. In truth, it only cut away the one chain holding her back: the rules to limit casualties and avoid open fights. Now, with her official death granting perfect cover and her training as one of only 12 female SEALs giving her skills beyond belief, she was about to turn their victory party into the last mistake they would ever make. Staff Sergeant Clara Mitchell had been working deep in Red Haven for 3 weeks, running reconnaissance on a terrorist cell intelligence claimed was preparing a strike on American assets. Her task was clear: gather intel, locate key leaders, and pass it back for a larger strike to erase the threat. But intel had been wrong about the scale of it. The cell wasn't only plotting one attack. They were linking with several groups across the area, weaving a network far more dangerous than expected. And they had marked her long before her handlers thought possible. The ambush came with dawn on her 21st day in the field. Clara had been observing from a hidden perch above the compound when she caught signs that didn't fit the routine she'd tracked for weeks. Too many armed men moving too fast, converging on lines that boxed her in. Her instincts engaged instantly. She flipped her beacon on, grabbed only the essentials, and headed toward her main extraction using escape routes drilled into memory. But they had guessed her paths. The first sniper's shot missed her skull by inches, sparking against the rock where she had been a heartbeat earlier. Clara dove behind cover, HK-416 raised, and launched into the kind of running firefight that proved the difference between training and survival. Outnumbered nearly 20-1 on terrain the enemy owned, with little ammo and no backup in sight, the scenario was one planners called hopeless. Clara had stared down worse. She tapped every lesson burned into her in SEAL training: bounding fire, terrain use, silence when needed, and keeping her mind sharp under crushing stress. For 2 hours she waged a moving fight through mountains that would have pushed a full squad of Marines to the limit. Her radio flared with her team's voice. Nightfall 7, this is Overwatch. Extraction postponed due to hostile aircraft. Hold your ground and remain concealed. Overwatch Nightfall 7, I'm taking fire from roughly 20 hostiles. Can't hold this position. Moving to alternate extraction, came the terse transmission. Nightfall 7, negative on alternate extraction. Area compromised. Hold your ground, the reply ordered. Clara found herself in the nightmare every special operator fears, trapped between enemy forces and friendly assets that couldn't reach her, saddled with orders that didn't match the chaos beneath her boots. She made the call that would shape the rest of the mission. She would finish the task on her own, by any means required to survive and get the job done. The running gunfight bled into the afternoon as Clara leaned on superior training and tactical instinct to stay ahead of troops who had both numbers and terrain on their side. Her HK-416 ran like a dream, letting her engage at distances that kept foes cautious while she threaded toward ground that offered options. But rounds were limited, and the enemy seemed endless. As the sun slid down, Clara crested a ridge and looked into a valley holding the compound and the alternate pickup site. Roughly 30 armed fighters had fanned out to block every route to safety. Her radio spat, "Nightfall 7, Overwatch. We've got SAM activity in your AO. Can't provide CAS or extraction until threats neutralized. Overwatch, how long? Minimum 12 hours, possibly more. Can you hold overnight?" Clara ran the math in her head. Low ammo, encircled by hostiles, no extraction, and mission-critical intel still missing. SOP would be to tuck into concealment and wait for pickup, avoiding contact, but the last 3 weeks of recon had rewritten the rules. The cell she'd been shadowing wasn't plotting a lone strike. They were coordinating simultaneous attacks across the region inside 48 hours. Waiting for extraction would mean thousands of innocents died. Overwatch, Nightfall 7, mission parameters have changed. Requesting permission to finish intel gathering before extraction, she reported. Negative, Nightfall 7. Your primary objective is survival and extraction. Intel is secondary, the answer came. Clara stared at the compound where plans that would kill many were being finalized. Then at her HK-416 and its dwindling magazines. Then at the darkness that could hide her approach. "Overwatch, I'm having comms issues. Switching to backup for a comms check," she said, and moved to an unused frequency, severing real-time contact with her handlers, while she drafted an infiltration plan that would either complete the mission or cost her life. What followed would force Joint Special Operations Command to rethink the limits of their most covert operators. For 2 hours, Clara watched the compound. Guard shifts, patrol lanes, and structural weak points. It was more fortified than intel had suggested. Multiple posts, overlapping fields of fire, and professional security routines. Yet it wasn't set up to stop a lone operator using advanced infiltration. At 0200 hours, when human vigilance dipped, Clara slipped toward the target. Navigating terrain that daylight made impossible, relying on night vision and strict sound discipline to stay unseen. The outer perimeter was a razor-wire fence watched by towers and sentries. Getting in meant neutralizing watchmen without tripping alarm bells, a job that required perfect timing and cold execution. She picked out a tower whose sweep left a predictable 45-second blind spot along a stretch of fence. Waiting for the moment, she moved across open ground with the silent precision drilled into her by SEAL training. The guard never knew she was there until her blade ended his watch. Inside the compound, the challenge only grew. She had to find and photograph the intelligence while slipping past roughly 40 armed fighters running their security routines. Clara moved through the compound on silence, timing, and a hard-earned read of human behavior from weeks of watching. These guards expected threats from beyond their walls, not someone already inside their perimeter. She found the command center where the leaders were putting the finishing touches on their plans. Through the glass, she could make out maps, comms racks, and detailed timetables. Getting in meant removing the guards without alerting the rest, a task that pushed her tradecraft to the edge. She used shadows and blind spots to approach, then waited for the rotation that would open access. The first sentry went down clean and quiet, executed with methods that left no obvious trace. The second was harder, posted where his absence would be noticed, so she used his body to preserve the routine and keep other guards from smelling trouble. Inside the command hub, the paperwork chilled her. The attacks set for the next day weren't a single strike or a single nation. They'd planned coordinated assaults on civilian targets across 3 continents: airports, malls, schools, government centers. The scale of the slaughter was far bigger than anyone had predicted. Clara photographed everything: plans, target lists, comms procedures, rosters, weapons inventories. That intel could stop every attack, but her presence had been discovered. As she finished, alarms screamed to life. Someone had found traces of an intruder, and within minutes, the whole compound would be hunting. She faced two choices: flee with the files, or make sure the cell could never carry out the attacks, even if it cost her life. She chose the hard line that would define her as an operator. She would destroy their operational capacity. Moving with the efficiency of someone who'd mapped the place inside out, she struck where it hurt most: comms that linked them to other cells, the weapons dumps, and the vehicle bay used for bomb fabrication. She set charges in the communications node, the arms storage, and the maintenance shed where bomb materials were kept. Then she began surgically removing leaders through precise shots and close-quarters techniques. Her HK-416 proved ideal for the tight spaces. Accurate, dependable, with a suppressor that let her cut targets without immediately tipping off the entire compound. Ammo was limited, and 38 fighters still hunted her. Clara turned the compound against itself, moving along routes she'd memorized, using the confusion and alarms to mask her passages and pick off those searching for a phantom. She fought with the clinical skill honed by years of training and the ruthless efficiency of someone who knew failure would mean thousands dead. One leader after another fell. One by one, their ability to operate was shredded. Defensive positions that had seemed impregnable were neutralized by someone who moved like a ghost and struck like a judgment. Still, the numbers were stacked against her. As Clara dropped her 15th target, the remaining fighters began tightening their search, laying overlapping fire zones, sealing escape routes, and clearing each structure with methodical precision. She ended up trapped inside the compound's main building, 25 armed men closing in on her position. Her magazines were nearly spent. The charges she'd planted were primed but idle, and the priceless intel she carried would vanish with her unless she found a way to transmit it first. She triggered her emergency beacon, sending the photos in burst transmissions so they'd reach her handlers even if she didn't live to explain. Then she detonated the charges. The comms hub went up first, severing the cell's links to outside groups. Seconds later, the weapons depot erupted, wiping out their arsenal. The vehicle bay followed, flames engulfing the materials stockpiled for bomb construction. Panic ripped through the defenders, creating the chaos Clara needed to drive toward the perimeter. But a sniper in one of the towers spotted her. His round tore into her shoulder, spinning her hard and flinging her HK-416 from her grasp. She scrambled into cover as more fire peppered the walls, then dragged herself forward, using ditches and rubble to shield her crawl toward the fence. Behind her, the base burned, munitions exploding in chain reactions that erased what little capacity the enemy might have saved. Ahead lay 30 meters of exposed ground she'd have to cross, bleeding, unarmed, and under overlapping fire. Clara made it 20 meters before another shot smashed into her leg, dumping her into a drainage ditch that offered only shallow cover. She hit her beacon one last time and pushed a final message. Mission complete. Intel sent. Cell destroyed. Tell my family I finished the job. Then she clawed toward the fence, every movement a gamble against the next bullet. A sniper's round cracked beside her head, showering her with stone chips, but the fire was thinning. The shouts behind her sounded like chaos, not coordination. She reached the wire, cut through with tools from her kit, and hauled herself beyond, into the jagged hills. Behind her, the compound lay in ruins, its leaders dead, its networks severed forever. She dragged herself further into the rocks, angling for terrain that might lead to extraction. But her blood loss was draining her strength, and hostile searchers were still on her trail. 2 hours later, dawn touched the mountains, as Clara lay in a ravine 2 clicks from the compound. Chopper blades echoed in the distance. Whether friendly rescue or enemy reinforcements, she couldn't tell. Her radio was wrecked, the beacon's battery fading, her body slipping in and out of consciousness. The aircraft thundered overhead without stopping. At 0647 hours, when her beacon finally went silent, Clara Mitchell was officially declared dead. Her handlers logged her death to Joint Special Operations Command with the terse note, "Operative completed intelligence gathering objectives before being eliminated by hostile forces." Intel indicates the cell was severely disrupted. What they didn't know was that the disruption was absolute, that the files she'd sent would stop coordinated strikes across continents, and that Clara Mitchell was alive in a mountain ravine, planning what came next. 3 days later, crawling awake in the cave she'd dragged herself into, she heard chatter from the ruined compound. Reinforcements trying to stitch the cell back together. Officially dead, her mission marked complete. Any sane person would have focused on hiding and waiting for pickup. Clara had never been sane in that way, and the documents she'd taken showed the network ran far wider than the single cell she'd already torn to pieces. For the next week, she watched from concealment, patching her wounds with kit supplies, mapping the men trying to rebuild command, and tracking the routes where leaders met to re-establish contact. They assumed safety because the American was dead, a mistake that would soon cost them everything. Her injuries had scabbed enough for movement, and her surveillance had pinpointed where the commanders were gathering to relink with other cells. Being declared dead meant she could act without rules, without political strings, without orders that put diplomacy ahead of stopping bloodshed. She decided to finish what her official death had only begun. The reinforcements had set up a temporary HQ roughly 5 kilometers from the ruined base, a complex where they tried to re-establish comms, reassign cells, and push forward despite losing their main site. Clara spent 2 days watching their rhythms, learning guard patterns and weak points, then planned an assault that would end their ability to operate for good. This time, she wasn't there to skimp on intel or to make token strikes. She intended to remove every person tied to plotting attacks on civilians. On day 8 of her official death, she launched the deadliest operation of her career. She ghosted in on approaches honed by a week in hostile terrain, slipping through cover that offered routes in but few ways out. The complex was held by about 15 fighters, more focused on comms than perimeter security, because they thought the American threat was gone. Clara entered via a supply building and worked methodically through the compound, taking out guards and support staff with weapons scavenged from the original site. Her movement was clinical, professional, absolutely ruthless. Everyone inside was part of planning or supporting assaults on innocents. Every life she extinguished was one fewer future casualty. Every decision weighed the cost of mercy against the price paid by civilians. She reached the command room where leaders were mid-video conference, coordinating fresh plans to replace what she'd destroyed. Through the cracked door, she heard talk of targets, timings, and tactics designed to maximize civilian deaths. Clara stepped in with weapons ready and removed every person in the room before they could react. The feed stayed live. Commanders in other locations watched their coordinators die on the screen. Rather than flee, she exploited the open comms, harvesting intelligence in real time. Faces, locations, chain of command, and operational plans across the network. Using their own links, she documented everything and pushed it back out through their systems to her handlers. Then she sent a message straight to the men watching. This is what happens to those who target innocents. Your network is compromised, your operations are terminated, and your personnel will be eliminated. Her handlers filed her death to Joint Special Operations Command with the blunt line: "Operative completed intelligence gathering objectives before being eliminated by hostile forces. Intel shows the cell severely disrupted." What they didn't realize was that the disruption was total. The files she'd sent would stop coordinated strikes across continents, and Clara Mitchell was alive in a mountain ravine plotting what came next. 3 days later, waking in the cave she'd dragged herself into, she heard chatter from the ruined compound, reinforcements trying to stitch the cell back together, and knew that, while she was officially dead and the mission complete, the network's reach extended far beyond the cell she'd already destroyed. For the next week, she kept watch from concealment, dressing wounds with kit supplies, mapping routes and meeting points, and marking the commanders who tried to rebuild their capacity. They assumed safety because the American was dead, a mistake that would prove fatal. Her injuries had mended enough for movement, and surveillance revealed where leaders met to reconnect with other cells. Being declared KIA meant she could operate without constraints, free of political strings or orders that put diplomacy ahead of stopping bloodshed. She decided to finish what her official death had only begun. Reinforcements set up a temporary command some 5 kilometers from the original site, a compact HQ where they re-established comms, reassigned cells, and tried to press on despite losing their main base. Clara spent 2 days watching their patterns, learning guard rotations and soft spots, then laid plans for an assault that would end their ability to operate for good. This time, she wasn't gathering token intel or making limited strikes. She intended to remove every person involved in plotting attacks on civilians. On day 8 of her declared death, she launched the deadliest operation of her career, slipping in like a ghost, along approaches honed by a weak and hostile terrain, and moving through cover that offered routes in but few ways out. The complex was held by about 15 fighters more focused on comms than perimeter security, because they believed the American threat had been neutralized. Clara entered through a supply building and methodically cleared the compound, taking out guards and support staff with weapons scavenged from the first site. Her movement was clinical, professional, and utterly ruthless. Every person inside was part of planning or enabling assaults on innocents. Each life she snuffed was one fewer future casualty. Every decision balanced the cost of mercy against the price paid by civilians. She reached the command room where leaders were mid-video conference, coordinating fresh plans to replace what she'd destroyed, and through the cracked door heard talk of targets, timing, and tactics meant to maximize civilian deaths. Clara stepped in with weapons ready and removed everyone in the room before they could react. The feed remained live, and commanders elsewhere watched their coordinators die on screen. Rather than flee, she exploited the open links, harvesting real-time intelligence, faces, locations, chains of command, and operational plans across the network, then pushed that data back out over their systems to her handlers. Finally, she spoke directly to the men watching. "Consider this your only warning." Then she wrecked their comms and fought her way out of the complex, and instead of disappearing, she kept hunting. Over the next 4 days, Clara systematically destroyed every safe house, weapons cache, and support facility she'd identified during her long reconnaissance. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd lost everything yet had a mission to finish. Being declared dead let her use any tactic necessary without political or diplomatic regret, and her training let her operate alone in hostile territory for extended stretches. Her drive meant she would not stop until every threat to civilians was erased, and by week's end, a network that Intel said would take months of international effort to dismantle had been annihilated by a single operative who was officially dead. Clara became the ghost that haunted terrorist nightmares, the specter that struck at hidden threats, the legend proving death has no hold over someone who refuses to quit. When she finally activated her emergency beacon 2 weeks after being declared KIA, the response from Joint Special Operations Command was unprecedented. Nightfall 7, this is Overwatch. We show your beacon, but our records list you as KIA. Confirm identity. Overwatch Nightfall 7, mission objectives complete. Request extraction and debriefing, she answered. I have significant, actionable intelligence on terrorist networks that require immediate action. 30 seconds of tense silence then. Nightfall 7, confirm you are alive and mission capable. Affirmative, Overwatch. Very much alive. Mission complete, ready to come home. 12 hours later, the extraction team found Clara sitting calmly beside a cache of weapons and stacks of intelligence. More like someone who'd finished a routine task than the operative who'd obliterated a regional network after being officially declared dead. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane, the team leader, approached with relief, awe, and professional respect. Mitchell, our records say you've been dead for 2 weeks. Intel says the network's wiped out. Want to explain? Clara stood, slinging recovered kit over her shoulder. Chief, they left me for dead, so I returned the favor. Mission complete. All objectives achieved. Network neutralized. Kane scanned the documents, then the smoke columns from ruined facilities, then the woman who'd been declared KIA. What you did here, this goes beyond special operations. This is something else. Clara let out the first smile she'd managed in 3 weeks. Chief, sometimes being dead is the perfect cover for finishing impossible missions. The debrief at Joint Special Operations Command ran 3 days and gathered more senior officers in one room than she'd ever seen. They reviewed her intel, tactics, independent operations, and the complete dismantling of a network plotting coordinated civilian attacks. Admiral Catherine Morrison, commander, asked the question that framed the significance of her actions. Mitchell, you were declared KIA, your mission closed, and you had no orders to continue. Why did you keep fighting? Clara thought of the plans she'd uncovered and the innocents who died if she'd followed SOP. Ma'am, the mission wasn't done until the threat was gone. Being declared dead gave me the operational freedom to finish it. Admiral Morrison nodded. What you accomplished in 2 weeks would normally take months, multiple agencies, and major resources. You did it alone, wounded, using captured gear and tactical skill. Ma'am, I had training and motive. You've also shown us something that will change how we view special operations. General Patricia Hayes, now director of a joint program, added, can this be systematized? Can we train operatives to function effectively after being declared KIA? Clara weighed the question. Ma'am, it needs a specific psychological profile. Someone who can act alone for long periods, make tactical calls without guidance, and stay focused when cut off from support. Not every operator fits that mold, but some do. Those individuals could be invaluable where conventional approaches fail and politics block official action. Admiral Morrison leaned in. What you're describing is a new class of operations, ghost missions run by phantom operatives who can achieve what acknowledged forces cannot. Exactly, ma'am, Clara replied. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't tech or numbers. It's surprise and the assumption that death ends the fight. Sometimes it's the warrior everyone assumes is dead, moving with complete freedom because the enemy believes the danger has been erased. From those high-level debriefs came a program classified beyond even the deepest security clearances. Operatives would be chosen for profiles that proved extraordinary independence, tactical imagination, and the ability to function alone under crushing isolation. They'd be sent on missions where failure meant official denial, but success earned only quiet thanks from nations that could never admit what had been done. Clara Mitchell became the first instructor, teaching others how to survive their own deaths and fight on when the world thought they were gone. Her students learned to live in the gray zone, between life and death, between recognition and denial, between the rulebook and a doctrine beyond doctrine. They learned that sometimes the surest path to completing an impossible mission was to fail it first. Years later, when analysts puzzled over why certain networks had simply vanished, why threats evaporated with no record of military action, why some of the worst problems just disappeared, they would find nothing. No reports, no acknowledgments, no evidence. Only faint echoes of operations that never officially occurred, carried out by operatives who never officially existed. And deep in archives locked under presidential authority, one slim file carried a single line. Sometimes the most dangerous operative is the one the world believes is dead. Clara Mitchell had been left for dead in enemy territory. She returned as something far more lethal than anyone had foreseen. Proof that legends never die. They just learn to fight unseen. The enemy had celebrated her death. History would mark that celebration as their final mistake. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Captain Joe's Stories for more incredible tales like this.